How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to Killmark Collectors. As always, I'm Brandon, and today we're going to be doing an after-action debrief of the Battle of 3F TAC up in Branch. Now, this battle involved over 1,200 pilots and was not without its fair share of issues, but was one of the most fun experiences that I've had in Eve Echoes to date. So with that, let's undock and dive into it. .3F TAC is one of the most strategic points on the map between Branch and Declan. Without being able to control this spot, you are not able to get into Branch from Declan or vice versa. There are some ways that you can get around from Branch into like KTAC 8 and other things like that, but you're not able to actually go all the way down into the main area of Declan. So for the Silent Federation, where our home is in Declan and where we've been continuously expanding SOV, this was a really strategic, important spot. Now, if you guys have been following this channel or just Eve Echoes politics in general, you'll know that our battle against the Fireflies has been ebbing and flowing, and this was really the first real offensive that we've had since the Fireflies kind of came back in, I think, March or April, so it's been a couple of months. This battle, they did call on a number of their allies and a couple of mercs, so there were not just Fireflies in system, there was also the No Please Stop and KOFR. Now, in terms of the pilots that were on each side, I did have an alt in system, and on gate I was able to see that there were about 200 battleships that were red to us on gate versus we had about the same number. There was also a comparable number of battle cruisers, and so there was a lot of DPS on the field for both sides. Now, in terms of Logi, and this is going to come up again later, there were about 58 Logi that I was able to count manually on the gate for the Fireflies, and we had about 49. So it was pretty close. They did have a bit of an edge, but it wasn't decisive in a way that you may think. And again, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, this fight was a pretty much straight up brawl. As soon as we jumped in, we were straight on gate and pretty much stayed there the entire time. So there's not a whole lot of fancy graphics for me to really show you in terms of maneuvers and where things went. We did have a fleet of cruisers that was harassing the Citadel and drawing some of the focus away from our battle cruisers and battleships on the gate, but their job was really, again, to kind of be in system and keep that timer paused so that we could deal with the forces on the gate and then jump into the actual Citadel to destroy it. Now, this fight was over an hour and a half long, and I'm not going to make you sit through and watch that because, again, like I said, there's not a whole lot of a maneuvering, and I was the Logi, and it just probably would not be that interesting. So I'm actually going to play this at 10 times speed. You'll see on the left-hand side is my main view with the Logi and our allied forces, and then on the right there is the enemy forces with their numbers. These are time synced, so you should be able to kind of see as we're going up and down. Getting into the fight itself, the first big thing that you'll notice here is that when we jumped into the gate, the system capped itself at 1,000 participants. And you may be wondering, where did the 200 other participants go? And the answer to that is that it was a combination of disconnects, and we just got stuck on the other side of the gate. We had told the devs to reinforce the servers, and to their credit, I think they did. I experienced a lot fewer disconnects than normal. I know that there were still a lot of disconnects, and that's unfortunately just kind of part of the game right now. But you can also see that when that system hit 1,000, it basically treated it as if it was Jita back in the old days, and they wouldn't let people jump in. You had to just keep spamming the jump command. Now, what ended up happening is that our FCs had to transition from focusing down battleships to cruisers and battle cruisers to try to get some of those smaller ships off of the field, kill the pods, and then ultimately be able to get our reinforcements in and just keep feeding the machine a little bit here so that we could eventually turn the tide. Now, I do want to go ahead and just put it out there that the Fireflies did have a good bit of disconnects when we jumped in as well. I think their numbers went from almost 200 battleships to about 160. We were only able to get about 170 at first in, and then that number steadily grew. And so there was a good bit of fighting the servers as well as each other throughout this engagement. Now, that being said, one thing that did kick in is Time Dialation, and this was actually the first fight that I have been in that was part of the Time Dilation mechanic, or that leveraged the Time Dilation mechanic. Basically what happens is when the server starts to get overloaded, rather than just shut down, it will start queuing up the actions and orders that you are giving to your ship. Now, this may be you trying to approach a different direction or maneuver, change your thrusters, activate a mod, target an enemy, anything like that. That's all thrown into a giant queue and basically sequenced up. The server is then able to kick those through and process them. And that's why even in this super high speed playback, you can see everything kind of slowing down. When this happens, it does happen incrementally. So you start with 2 times dilation, so everything happens at half speed. Then it goes to 3 times. I believe that's a third speed. And then it can go all the way down to a 10 times time dilation. I don't think that's possible with the current cap of only 1,000, but getting up to even 3 times dilation is pretty impressive and says how much the fight was going on, or how much of the fight was really happening as part of this this engagement. Now, as we were moving through here, you'll see that we were able to start whittling down the enemy battleship numbers a little bit. I think the big thing that contributed here was really the fact that while the enemy had their allies and they had multiple fleets, they were split across different alliances and different doctrines. Now, if you guys aren't familiar, an alliance doctrine is basically an idea of we want to all be flying the same ships. The reason for that is that we can give our FCs, they know exactly what the optimal ranges will be. They're going to know exactly what the speed is of our ships, the tank, all of those types of things that go into being able to make a tactical maneuver. For us, that means that we were all flying Tempest. We knew what those ranges were. We were able to call targets so that we could get max DPS on those ships and apply that DPS in a consistent manner. You contrast that with what the Fireflies had. Again, because they were flying so many different alliances and different allies, we saw drone ships, we saw missile ships, we saw rails, cannons, lasers, pretty much everything. And those all have different characteristics. They apply damage at different ranges. They apply damage at different times. For example, the drones flying versus a cannon that's automatically going to immediately apply DPS. And so you're going to see some of that come into play. And I think that was a really big benefit for us because we were, again, able to consistently apply damage and call targets in a way that we knew would maximize our DPS. The other thing that I think really helped us here was that we were all in the same comms. I don't know what the enemy comms were looking like, but given the language barriers and the time zone challenges, I would not be surprised if they were all using different comms. This is where that logi difference comes into play, and where I said it was maybe not quite as significant or decisive as I may have expected it to be, because I think that what probably happened is there were multiple fleets all, with their own logi, and so they would only rep what was in their fleet. You contrast that with our fleet, which was able to basically take the entire 200 battleship fleet plus all of our guardians and everything else. Our guardians were able to, on comms, go ahead and call out, hey, I need help. And people from 3 or 4 different fleets were able to then target him even without a command or without an in-game focus fire or something like that. So instead of only having 1 fleet's worth of logi focusing your 1 guardian, we were able to have 4 fleets worth of logi all focusing in on 1 or 2 guardians at a time. So if they got focused, we were able to keep them up. This proved to be decisive, and I think was the reason that we were really able to only lose a couple of ships, as opposed to the Fireflies, which, again, I'll get into just a minute. Their losses were pretty significant. At a certain point, I think that the Fireflies did realize that we were going to win this fight. They started pulling back. My game actually crashed several times. I'm not sure if I got the final pullback or retreat because I was disconnected, but when the enemy was down to about 120 to 130 battleships, they did start to pull back to pull those forces off grid and preserve those for future engagements. I think that was the right strategic call. Again, just based off of how things were going. This isn't a biased opinion. This is just based off of the numbers that were on field, whether it was because of disconnects or anything else. I think it was the right call. At that point, they were outnumbered with battleships almost 2 to 1, and to preserve those assets for future engagements, again, I think was the right call. So kudos to the Firefly leadership and the fleet commanders for you guys. Being able to make that is not an easy call, and I really respect the hell out of you for being able to do that in the face of everything that was going on. Now, in terms of the total losses, we have done an after-action debrief. We estimated that there were 313 enemy ships destroyed for around 103 billion ISK. You add into the 14 billion ISK of the Citadel kill itself, you end up with just under 120 billion in losses for Fireflies and their allies. On our side, we had about 55 ships that were lost for just over 21 billion. Again, that's not a fun loss, but contrasting that with what we were able to take off field, and I think this was a pretty decisive victory. Now, again, if you guys have different opinions or if you saw this battle from a different perspective, I would love to hear about it. I'm only doing this from what I saw and what I was flying. This was very early in the morning for me, so my brain was not working, fully functioning, but I think this was a really fun fight. Kudos to Firefly, No, KOFR, all of you guys. This was a fantastic fight. I really enjoyed this. I think this was a great example of what Eve Echoes can really be. I'm hoping that we can get past some of the challenges with the devs and everything else that was going on, but I'm just really stoked to have been a part of this, and thank you so much for taking the fight and for really being there and making the most out of this game. So guys, let me know what you think down below if you had a different opinion of the fight or the way that I've analyzed this. I'd be happy to hear and discuss. And of course, as always, like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you're going to do. And until next time, fly safe.